Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the sociology of the family. To begin, the book compares genealogy versus sociology. Genealogy is specifically the study of family lineage, including history and genetics. And now they're doing some really cool DNA testing and being able to trace our families back even more so with genes than we could in the past. But we've always been able to do some little bit of at least tracking our family tree, which is always a lot of fun. But the difference between sociology is the study of society, groups of people, and social interactions and social institutions. And the family is an institution of society, which is why it falls underneath the realm of sociology. We look at the family and we ask questions like, how does the family structure our lives and socialize us? Is there conflict within the family? How is meaning constructed through the family? We look at things like group dynamics and family structures and types of families. It's really an endless study because there's so much to families and it's incredibly complex. And then depending upon the culture you're in, that also may influence the dynamics. There also are universal trends when it comes to family. But again, the idea of family is that built into our biology or is it purely a social construction? Now, in our biology is this need for other people. We all have these attachment needs. We need someone to care for us at least when we're babies, otherwise we end up as feral children. Without that interaction from other people, we don't develop and grow. And so the family is one of the most important facets of helping us learn how to exist in the world by supporting us and feeding us, and it plays all these different roles. But again, is it the family itself that's built into our biology, or is it the idea of just needing other people in general? So again, just some cool introductions of how you can perceive the family. So the book goes through and it gives a very broad definition of family. The book defines family as groups of related people bound by connections that are biological, legal, and emotional. But we have to ask this question of what does it mean by related? Does it mean related by blood? Or does it mean related by sharing a common social environment, for example? And so again, we've kind of extended this idea of family to not necessarily only include those that share our common genes, but we've also introduced the idea of best friends becoming aunts and uncles and dogs becoming members of our family. So the actual definition of family, again, is arbitrary, and depending upon the person you're talking to, everybody might have a slightly different understanding of family, okay? But the book points out, along with family comes this expectation of care, and then the idea that the family is a system that is hierarchically divided through lines of authority is how your book phrased it. But again, why is the family hierarchically stratified? Does one individual or two individuals or several have more power over other people, for example? What is the parent-child relationship like? What is the husband and wife or husband and husband, or significant others or partner relationship? How does that work? Or all the other various ways that we can gender identify and construct families, for example. So the book gives kind of some definitional axes, a central way of being able to perceive families. And it breaks it up into personal families and legal families. So the personal family is the people whom we feel related and who we expect to define us as members of their family as well. And this kind of opens up the definition of family, saying that relation doesn't necessarily need genetics. It needs that common expectation of care, of desire to belong, of willingness to accept, considering each other our family. Again, these are all meanings that are created through social interaction. And then you have the legal family, which is justified by the bureaucracy or the government, a certified family that can be recognized by a court of law, for example. And this involves being related by birth, marriage, or adoption, all of which require legal standing. The census of the United States has expanded the definition of family to really just kind of look at it as a household. So the census doesn't ask who's in your family, the census asks who's in your household, and that consists of people that live together. The book discussed the institutional arenas which in the family takes place. So an institutional arena, as defined, is a social space in which relations between people in common positions are governed by accepted rules of interaction. And this kind of gets into the idea that the family is a system that exists within a society consisting of a whole bunch of other institutions, all of which influence each other. For example, the family exists in a society that has an economy, and the economy can then affect the family. If you have a Great Depression or an economic recession or a virus that forces people out of work, for example, how in turn does that affect the family? So again, the family exists within a larger society consisting of social institutions. The family arena, as defined in the book, the specific system itself of the family, is where people practice intimacy, childbearing, socialization, and caring work within the social world. And the social world as defined as everything outside of your head, for example. Then you have the state arena, and this is the idea that the family exists, again, in a society consisting of institutions of not only economics, but also a government. And so our government regulates the family. It regulates the legalization of marriage, the legalization of adoption, for example. It has a role in controlling violence. For example, the government will step in when cases of child abuse or domestic abuse, things along those lines. It influences how resources are distributed, because the government sets things like tax rates and cuts for families and all these other factors that have to be considered. So again, the whole idea is that the family exists within this larger social world consisting of institutions, and again, related to economics is the market itself, because the market or economics is an institution that then influences the family. It's associated with socioeconomic status and overall life chances. The book defines it as where labor for pay, economic exchange, and wealth accumulation take place. And then again, this is where you kind of get into the inequality of the families, because not all families have the same socioeconomic status. So if you want to understand things like socioeconomic status and the influence of that upon the families, the ability of a family to rise up the social class ladder, the ability of a family to get access to education and job prestige and material goods is often based upon, your parents' socioeconomic status, for example, because your parents' socioeconomic status then is associated with your education, where they can afford to send you to school, the type of neighborhood you live in. And it's a sad reality, but the type of neighborhood you live in is associated with your overall educational attainment. Therefore, things like poverty are associated with whether or not you graduated college, for example, because children growing up in higher socioeconomic status families graduate college twice as likely as somebody who was in poverty, for example. And this just goes to show you that inequality economically is then associated with, the individual rising up of members of the family, for example, in the social class ladder. So the book delves into the sociological theories of the family, and this is very important to get into right away, because it's a way to kind of frame our approach to studying the family and examining the family as a system existing in a society consisting of a whole bunch of other systems that all influence each other. So the first theory we're going to look at is structural functionalism, and how can this be applied to the family. So structural functionalism is the idea that all these institutions, the economy, the family, the media, the government, the education system, they all structure society itself, structure the lives of groups of people, okay? And so when we look at institutions, the very first questions we ask are things like, what's the purpose of the institution? Or what's the function of the institution? The economy manages the bartering of goods and services. The education system socializes and teaches people to fulfill social roles, for example. So what is the role of the families? That's what you're going to be asking. And again, you're going to tell that the role of the family is multifaceted. The family not only cares for you and gives you support and food and shelter and water, but it's also a main agent of socialization. Your ideology, which then influences the structure of the brain and the way you think and how you perceive reality, is highly influenced by your family, for example. Then you can apply functionalism to ask things like questions about social roles, for example. Why historically, regarding traditional gender roles, were men the head of the household, and why were men providers and women homemakers? And then in the 1960s, the census, as your book talks about, had to change its definition of family because women, females, were standing up and saying, you know, what's this about a man being the head of a household, and starting to question the whole idea of gender roles and authority structure within the family. And so females challenged these ideas of traditional gender roles. And so now in modern times, you start to see the increase of egalitarian gender roles, the sharing of the family roles, for example. Okay? So when you look at, you know, what's the purpose and the function of the family, how is it subdivided, what is the role that everybody plays, how does everybody doing their job in the family support the overall structure and functioning of the family? So if all the children are helping with the dishes and the parents are going to work and everyone's cooking and cleaning and they're holding down the fort, you know, everyone's playing roles that need to be played. But how are those roles divided can then be influenced by traditional ideologies that can often be sexist, you know. And so this is the idea of, in many countries, if not most countries in the world, the idea of a patriarchal, male-dominated, head of the household family still exists to this day. And we're seeing some of those threats, you know, with Afghanistan, for example, when women are feeling like they're, again, being forced back into that submissive role. And you got to ask questions, you know. So what happened in America to the extent that egalitarian roles are being shared, that men and women are both working equally? How does the fact that now that women and men can both work equally, how does that influence factors like daycare and child caring and the roles that everybody plays? And how is both, you know, males and females and intersex all working? How has that influenced, you know, the family itself and the structure of the family? Okay, and so again, we can just apply these theories until we're blue in the face and go in all kinds of cool directions. But again, you're looking at, from a functionalist perspective, the family as a system that structures our lives, and we all play roles, and that, you know, fulfills the necessary roles of the family to fulfill its purpose. Conflict theory, again, is this idea that groups are competing with groups. So in the 1960s, when females challenged this traditional definition of the family as a male-dominated, head of the household, patriarchal system, the dynamics of the family itself has changed, and that resulted in a reduction of inequality between males and females, for example. And so females and males had to challenge these traditional ideologies that were causing conflict, which was the subjugation of females into submissive gender roles in which they couldn't participate in the larger society, and that was causing conflict between males and females, which led to 3 waves of the feminist movement. But again, this 3 waves of the feminist movement then in turn changes the dynamics of the family. It then in turn changes the roles that everybody plays. So again, this conflict then influences the function, the structure of the family itself. Symbolic interactionism is a theory that says that society is socially constructed through interaction, by us working together and exchanging meaning symbolic language, meaning words, okay, or any other form of body language, you know, because again, even if we can't make words, we can still create languages with our hands and other ways of talking, for example. So any way that we work together, that's the idea. So when you apply that to family, you're basically saying that the family is constructed through social interaction. By us building this family and creating this family and maintaining this family and working together as a team, for example, we're the ones who construct family. We're also the ones who construct the ideologies attached to family, the meanings attached to family. We're the ones who constructed traditional gender roles that subjugated women into the lower classes into a submissive position for 10,000 years, when, you know, males were able to have the dominant social position, be able to go out and create more life chances for themselves, for example. So again, but we're also the ones who came back and were like, let's change the meaning attached to what it means to be a female in a relationship. Does it really mean that they can't ever work again and they're not allowed to go to college and things along those lines? And so over the last 100 years, women have been going to college and they've been changing gender roles in the family. And men have started to adopt things that were traditionally feminine, for example, like being able to stay home with our family and take care of the kids, which is amazing because now males in modern times, we can stay home with our children and females can go to work and we can completely turn things up on its head. But that all came from conflict, okay? So through that conflict, these gender roles have changed. The meanings attached to what it means to be father and mother, any other labels that you want to attach, have slightly changed, at least in the United States, over time. Feminism is essentially, everybody confuses this, but all feminism cares about is equity. Equality between groups, that's what it's all about. It's all about everyone should have the same chance for life chances, be able to get an education, be able to get a job, and the attainment of wealth to increase their life chances by rising up the social class ladder. So when it comes to the family, it's all about equity. And not only challenging, the husband versus the wife, the husband versus the husband, the dominant roles that are being played, and leveling out those playing field, but also asking questions about the roles of children versus parents and grandparents versus parents and all the other hierarchically structured roles that are part of the family system itself. Exchange theory is this idea that, it's all costs and benefits, weighing, and so we enter into these relationships, we create these family structures, we build these families based upon weighing of the costs and benefits, okay? And so we enter into relationships to maximize our outcomes. But again, this goes a lot into biology itself, because why do we establish relationships with other people? What does interacting with other people do for us in general? Well, again, you can't build a skyscraper by yourself. How many people does it take to make electricity work? How many people, what happens if you get several people involved in the raising of children? Does that increase the outcomes of the children? And now when it comes to brain rewards themselves, okay, yes, we have brain rewards from short-term relationships that are both friendship and sexual relationships. But if you study the psychology of brain rewards for long-term relationships, over time, you release more neurotransmitters associated with brain rewards, such as dopamine, by being with one person than you do with many. So this idea in our biology of being with one person and starting a family and working together has a lot of evolutionary psychological outcomes that improve the quality of life, not just for the people in the relationship, but also for the children themselves. And the modernity focus is this idea that the family consists of individuals, that society itself consists of individuals. And there is no society if you don't have a bunch of individuals working together as a group. So the modernity perspective is this idea that we can go macro to micro, looking at the family as a system, but also looking at the system itself as its smallest parts. But what we learn from things like Gestalt psychology is you can't understand a system just by knowing its parts. What you have to understand is how all the parts work together. So again, to understand the whole, you can't just add up the sum of the parts. You have to watch all the sum of the parts work together. It's like taking apart a car, right? You're not going to know what an alternator does, and so you put it in the car, have it work with everything else, and then you're like, oh, I see what it does now. So when it comes to research methods, we just break it down simply into two subheadings. You have quantitative research methods and qualitative research methods. Examples of quantitative research methods are numerical data, like how many marriages were there this year? How many divorces were there this year? Are more people getting married in one state than another? Are people getting married at later in life than they did in the 1950s? Okay, quantitative studies, numbers. Looking at incomes of families and comparing regions and which families in New York City have more money than families in Ohio and why. Okay, but the why question often gets into qualitative data because numbers tell us a lot, but sometimes we need qualitative data to really bring out what those numbers are saying, or because the numbers, you can't even use numbers to study the phenomena. So again, there's a lot of social phenomena that numbers just don't account for what we need to understand. I need to go out and understand people's subjective experiences of their reality. I need to go out and understand the common themes shared by other people. And just by asking some survey that can be quantified might not have all the information I need. I might need to get people together and code their common themes and clusters of meanings to really understand what people are trying to say and their experiences of the family and things along those lines. Okay, so quantitative is numerical data, qualitative is non-numerical data. With quantitative data, again, we can quantify surveys, we can do statistics. With qualitative data, we can do open-ended questions, we can do interviews, we can go out and do field research and observations. There's all kinds of things we can do with both methods. But again, we have these methods that we can use separately or together, okay? And they're just there because those are the two basic approaches to research. Demography is just an aspect of population studies, okay? So I love demography because you're going out looking at cities and marriage rates and all of that. It's just absolutely fascinating to me. The life course perspective involves studying the family or families over a period of time, looking back in history, all of that. So it's the idea that the family evolves from beginning to end. You can't just take a family in the middle of the family's evolution and then understand the family. You want to see the family from its creation to all the middle stuff, to the finalness, from beginning to end, from death till do us part, for example. Okay? A cohort is just looking at a group of people with a common bonds. Surveys, again, are just asking questions that can be quantified, but they often involve open-ended questions that we can get qualitative data from by examining common themes. We can do longitudinal research, which is studying one family or just several families over a long period of time. Or we can do cross-sectional research, which involves studying families at one period of time instead of a lot of different times. And with cross-sectional research, we might have just an incredible diversity to make sure it's representative. We can do, again, interviews and observations just to find out about things. And then to avoid bias in any research, again, you remove your opinions. The goal is to remove all of your opinions and let the research itself speak for itself, okay? Again, thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.